why the Constitution is our book, our highest deciding factor. Yes, our legal Torah. But like when you guys hear is something constitutional, do you think is it legal, or because what we're basically, I think we've come to a consensus that judicial review is necessary, but whether it's constitutional is another story. So what Marshall clearly did was he worked backwards. He decided what needed to be done and then tried to find a way to prove it to be constitutional. And I think that now we're getting into his politics and the game he was playing. And do we agree? If everyone could just do that, if everyone could decide how they thought things should go and work backwards, where would we be as a country? Because he is a really persuasive person, brilliant, who had a great argument, but if that's always how it worked, where would we be?
It's really hard to do.
He did it though. This is just
He's Marshall.
okay, but this is just proof. There are a lot of smart people.
I don't know that many people
Whoever.
Okay.
Moral of the story: if this were a practice that were typical in government, would you, are we good with that? Because constitutional or not, we know we need judicial review and
Sorry. Just to summarize kind of what you're asking, should we see the merits of something and then make it so it's constitutional and like that? So when the Constitution said black people are 3/5 of a person, that's obviously not okay. So what could have happened was working from the merits, saying that it's not okay to say that a human being is only 3/5 of a person, and then figure out why that's unconstitutional.
Well, I think an example of that along those lines is, do you know what the grandfather clause is?
I don't.
So it's how African Americans, way after slavery was abolished, when the northern states were advocating for African American rights, in the South, states passed laws that didn't let African Americans vote when their grandparents hadn't been able to. Obviously, their grandparents weren't able to. They were literally enslaved.
Yeah.
So that's an example of the southern states enforcing a practice. They wanted to prevent African Americans from voting, and they worked backwards, and it's constitutional. It doesn't explicitly say you can't vote because you're black. It's you can't vote because your grandfathers couldn't. And very different story. Everything being said, obviously it's different, but do we feel they are comparable in some way?
It's an interesting point of do merits override what's constitutional, and that's a judgment call.
Well, that's exactly why there's no, you can't really say, because what's wrong tomorrow or what's wrong today might not necessarily be what's right or wrong in
Zach Wald quotes.
Well, that's an argument for merits should overtake the Constitution, or override the Constitution.
I
Because
think
merits
it's the
would
opposite.
change with public opinion.
Exactly. Oh.
And do you want the Constitution to be reshaped to match
Yeah.
society, or do you want society to be reshaped to match the Constitution?
Here's the thing that makes, in my opinion, the Constitution supreme, is that when the country was founded, you had all these people saying, okay, we're going to come together in a union, or actually sometime after it was founded, we're going to come together in a union that's going to make this a unique entity in the world, an actual union of states, but we need some compact that we're all going to be able to agree to and reference, so that nobody's getting shorthanded, that everybody knows what they're getting into. And that's why it's tricky unless you do it by means of amendment, where you have uniform agreement. That's why when you start changing things, it's tricky, and that's why I think when you have a law going up against something in the Constitution, that's why you have to stick to the Constitution, because the Constitution is supreme, and that's what everyone's agreed to, and that's what you have to go by. Yeah.
As to that end point, it doesn't necessarily change my question, but that is important that it's not like every state is re-signing the Constitution every year, I'm assuming. Right, so if it's changing, there's an issue there. But on a different question, semi-related, do you think it would be okay for Marshall to establish judicial review if he somehow convinced Congress to make an amendment to the Constitution, rather than just saying that it was there.
I think that's much more kosher.
Yeah, I
What do you
agree.
Do you think that would have been possible?
If I
No,
remember
because
That
at
time.
that point in time, I
Congress.
don't think so. Because the other party controlled Congress.
That, because I deal with this.
That's, yeah, that's the power play of this group.
And ironically, like in taking the power, he made it impossible for anyone else to get power. And like in taking the power, he said he had the right to take power.
Yeah.
Like he derived the power and took it and
At the
said
same
he
time.
could have the power to take it in one fell swoop. So.
This is just the problem like I have with Supreme Court cases in general. I just feel like each time a case is made, the writers use whatever text they have, based on whatever era they're in, and use interpretations of that. And because text isn't perfect, it has mistakes, and also so many people can take it in different ways. And so Marshall's argument, like none of us saw, I don't think any of us saw one of his interpretations and were like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. There's just no way he could have interpreted that from his text. There are ways to interpret what he interpreted. And so you end up in this infinite loop where like every case they used the past interpretations. And so by the end, I personally end up wondering, like, why are we still doing this? Why are we still just interpreting things based off interpretations? Because in the end, are you really ending up with like moral things? And sometimes I'm very surprised that it's worked so well for this long.
I agree.
It might be worthwhile to talk about also, which we've talked about quite a bit. Do you think it should be the courts that have judicial review or another political body? What do you guys think? Or like,
There's-
do you want to talk
there's-
about that or?
Yeah.
I like the idea of the courts having judicial review because their job is to be educated in the law.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
like, of all people, usually they have the best knowledge. And a president doesn't necessarily have to know the law. There's an example of that. And congressmen don't necessarily have to either. But, I mean, if you want to become a successful judge, you start as a lawyer or something like that. And you're gonna have to go to, say, law school, or you're gonna have to have some understanding of the law to be that your space in the first place.
Right, well, even if it wasn't the courts, the entity would have like experience with the law, but I think like the major difference is like, are we putting our value and trust in elected people that are like democratically elected, and does that make judicial review less of a supreme power? Because I think like part of like the magic of judicial review is that the highest court system is not directly elected, they're appointed by people that are elected. And also, this always is interesting, but like with electoral votes and all of that stuff and the way that Trump got elected, but like not over like 50% of the country actually voted for him, and like the way that electoral votes, do you guys remember in 2016, the way they all added up?
The college is completely
Yeah.
broken, yeah.
The way that that can happen, and that's like a deep, deep flaw in our like voting system, in my opinion, because like what?
It is, yeah.
But the fact that that person who isn't even fully voted like correctly by the people has the power to choose.
Not supported by the people.
It has the people to appoint, has the power to appoint the people that have the supreme power. That doesn't seem democratic to me.
And that's a good question. That's about, we could first elect Supreme Court judges, theoretically, if that was part of the general culture where, you know, you're expected to vote for the president, not necessarily local elections, but everyone usually thinks that voting for the president is something you should do. What if that changed, so it was you vote for the judiciary as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
And the electoral college.
The thing is, like, democracy is fantastic, but
I'm a fan.
yeah, I'm a fan of democracy. Definitely not an authoritarian, but the truth is, I don't really. I mean, political appointment of the courts isn't fantastic either, but I don't trust people to really know how to appoint a judge.
I agree.
And I don't trust senators or congressmen in general. I don't trust someone who has not, devoted their life to interpreting law, to interpret law at that level. So I think, even though it might seem gross, to have a pretty, like a fundamentally undemocratic system to interpret our laws, I think it makes a lot of sense. And sometimes it just have to be more practical than nice.
Additionally, if, let's say, the president could choose, like there was executive review, it wouldn't ultimately be the president, it'd be some lawyer in the executive department.
Right.
And that's
Yeah, the only
even
thing is
more
that-
undemocratic.